Welcome everyone to this Conversations in Careers interview. I'm delighted to be joined today by Jo Durgan, who works for the Babraham Institute. So today we're going to be speaking a little bit about Jo's career, but also touching on the sustainability side of life sciences. So really looking forward to having this conversation today. And thank you for joining us, Jo. I'm going to hand you over to Jo now. And Jo, if you could just give us a little bit of a background about what you currently do and how you got there.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jazz. And hi, everybody. So my name's Jo Durgan. I'm a senior scientist at the Babraham Institute, where I also have a kind of parallel role coordinating some of our sustainability efforts. I'm also a mum, 2 kids. And I guess how I got here, so I did my degree in biochemistry at the University of Bath. I then spent a year working as a research assistant in a small biotech company in London, and then decided to do a PhD. So I did my PhD with Peter Parker at Cancer Research UK in London. I then did a postdoc with Alan Hall at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York. And then moved to the Babraham Institute in 2014, first as a Marie Curie Fellow, and then I've stayed on since then, picking up this kind of parallel role in sustainability in around 2017, which I guess we'll come on to talk about.
Brilliant. Thank you for sharing that. So is your current role somewhere that you always kind of expected to be?
I'm not sure, actually. I think I've always known that I wanted to stay in science. I've always felt that I wanted to be doing something with some kind of tangible societal value, I suppose. But I think I've probably always been quite open-minded about where those interests could take me. My research career has followed quite a traditional kind of linear flow, up until really the decision to stay on longer term at Babraham and build this additional role in sustainability into the mix. So I think the kind of themes have always been there, but I'm not sure that I would have been aiming specifically for this position. It's just kind of evolved that way as I've gone through my career.
Amazing. So what kind of encouraged you to take on this sustainability mindset and start championing this within Babraham?
Yeah, so I've been concerned about environmental issues just on a personal level for a long time. And I think that feeling just really started to ramp up a few years ago for me, with the obvious kind of worsening of the climate crisis and the ecological emergency. I guess a lot of that sort of coincided with political instability, on both sides of the Atlantic. And that kind of left me feeling that it wasn't so obvious that, our leaders were necessarily going to do all the things that we needed them to do in the time frame that we needed them to do it. And so at some point, I just thought, instead of sitting around worrying about this hypothetically, it's better to just kind of try and get involved and help in some way. So I went through a bit of a thought process of, should I be changing fields and, retraining in this kind of area? And in the end, I thought maybe it was actually more productive to work in place and make the most of the kind of networks and knowledge that I had in science. And so I decided to go on a little bit of training about sustainability and explore what I might be able to do. So my route in really was through an organisation called the Climate Reality Project, which is led by Al Gore, who you might remember, he was the vice president in the Clinton years in America. And after he left politics, he made a documentary, The Inconvenient Truth, about climate change, and sort of went off on this new career of activism. And one of the things he did was establish this organisation, the Climate Reality Project. And they put on these training events where you go and you spend 2 or 3 days really intensively learning about the science of climate change, the solutions that we have, the kind of actions that we can all take to catalyse those solutions. And the deal is that once you finish the training, you go back to your community, wherever and whatever that is, and you take some action there. So I went and attended one of these training conferences, And they're really great because they include people of all different ages, from all different countries, all different professions. So what people choose to do at the end of it, really diverse. But as I say, I sort of saw a niche for myself in tackling this in my workplace. So that's really where I made a start on thinking about sustainability and life sciences.
Brilliant. I think that's actually so important to highlight the fact that you chose to actually stay within life sciences, because I know there's lots of people out there that care about the environment, as everybody should do, that look at the life sciences industry and they say, well, actually, you generate such a huge carbon footprint. There's so much single-use plastic, but there are ways in which we can try and combat this together. And we are so lucky to kind of be a part of the Green Impact program on the campus. Because you learn from people along the way, and we know that we do have to do stuff pretty quickly, but yeah, I think that's really, really important to highlight. Brilliant. So the sustainability stuff on the campus, can you tell me a little bit about how, like, what your goals are to maybe inspiring people to come on board with that?
Yeah, so I think this started for me sort of inside of the Babraham Institute, and it started on some really focused goals of things that we can identify in labs where we can make improvements in terms of energy efficiency and, you know, better reducing, reusing, recycling of our waste and so on. But we quite quickly realized that sustainability touches everything else about our working lives as well, you know, how we arrive to work every day on our commute, how we travel to our conferences, what we eat in the cafeteria. So it quite quickly extended from being very lab focused to being a bit broader. And then as we started doing all of this inside of Babraham Institute, you also realise that the exact same issues probably apply to all of the companies on campus. And if we team up and work together, we can get a lot more done a lot more quickly. So Green Impact's been brilliant for that, because it's been a really nice way to meet sort of like-minded people working in similar environments and, you know, swap information and team up to work together. So I think kind of moving forward is more of the same, really, identifying yet more actions that we can all take and learning from each other, bringing more companies on board, hopefully. But I think there's also scope for being even a bit more ambitious than that. I think ultimately what we need to do is sort of persuade people who influence an even greater number of people to be thinking in the same way. So we could think about funders, we could think about publishers, we could think about suppliers, and have these conversations with them as well. So I think that's the way I can kind of see that we can scale up what we're doing. And similarly, you know, when we think about energy efficiency and particular actions that we can take, we've started out with the very focused ones, like changing the set point on our freezers and making sure people switch equipment off. But as you kind of scale up, again, you can think bigger and bigger about that and ask questions like, you know, should we have a wind turbine on the campus, or should we put solar panels over the car parks? And these kind of bigger site level decisions that, you know, we can't decide for ourselves, but we can certainly advocate for some of these things. So yeah, I suppose the short answer is to keep doing more of the same, but maybe try to find ways to scale up our impact as we go along.
Amazing. So just jumping back to your career, so you mentioned that your career as a researcher was actually quite linear, but despite that, did you kind of face any sort of challenges along the way? Did you face any like tough decisions?
I think I have been lucky, I think, in my career, in that I can't think of any like major problems or big obstacles that I've faced. But I think, you know, everybody's career and life involves a few kind of challenges. I think the trickier moments have mostly been sort of logistical challenges to overcome. So at one point in my career, I just accepted my postdoc position, like dream lab, was really excited about it. And my boss told me that he was going to move the lab from London to New York. Which, you know, is a big wow. change, which, you know, I just bought a flat with my partner. And so we were quite settled in London. but, you know, we thought about it for a while, and it didn't take long, to be honest, to decide to go. But that involved, you know, renting our flat out, making a transatlantic move, my partner finding a job in New York as well. But then once we'd overcome that initial obstacle, it's like no real hardship to go and live in New York for a few years. And it turned out to be like an amazing opportunity. We had our kids there, you know, professionally, it was a really, really good, happy time in both of our lives. So, you know, that was a sort of minor obstacle that became a really good opportunity. And sort of similar, I guess the other tough bit may be learning how to maintain a good work-life balance once we became parents. And again, you know, that presents some challenges. You have to get better at time management and maybe have a bit more flexibility to your working. But that also presents opportunities. I think you have to get a lot better at deciding what's important. You know, you realize you've only got a finite amount of time, and you get a lot better, I think, at being forced really to have a filter on what you do, prioritizing the most interesting and important things to do in the lab, choosing only the things that you really care about to add on as extra responsibilities. So I think I also found that something that was hard at the front end, but probably ultimately, as well as having the loveliness of being a parent, it also has some work benefits as well.
Amazing. I think, yeah, that's a great point about flexibility. And actually, I think particularly over the last few years with the pandemic, employers are having to be more flexible and understanding the needs of employees. It's not like a one size fits all thing. I mean, for the slightly younger generations, for them and for me, really, it's like a priority is being able to save and get a mortgage. Whereas then you reach another stage where you have children and you need more flexibility there to fit around your life. But yeah, no, that sounds amazing. And New York as well. Yeah. So what made you want to move back? Was that always a plan to kind of come back to the UK, or?
Yeah, I think we always had it in our minds that we eventually would, for family reasons, really. We probably stayed a lot longer than we originally intended to, and hadn't necessarily anticipated coming back with 2 children, but we were very happy there, and we stayed longer, and life moved on. Once we had the kids, we were sort of thinking about coming back so they could see their grandparents and extended family more often. And we just kind of reached a point. My husband's a scientist as well. We'd reached a point where we'd both finished up projects, and it was a good moment to try and move back. And we were lucky that we managed to move to the same place at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. And what kind of key differences were there between working in the US and in the UK?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think probably I see more differences working in a big city to working in a smaller city or location than between the countries. So there were a lot of similarities between my PhD and my postdoc, which were in London and New York, compared to working out here in Babraham. But I think a lot of that probably has to do with the fact that I had a British boss in New York. So I think people are probably familiar with the stories of kind of expectations of very long hours and Sunday morning lab meetings and stuff that you get in some American labs. But I didn't really experience any of that because I'd moved there with a British boss. So we still had the kind of culture of how we'd done things in the London lab. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think not as many differences as you would have maybe expected.
Amazing. And throughout your career, did you kind of come across anyone or some it could have been multiple people that have maybe inspired you along the way that have maybe helped shape some of the key decisions in your career journey?
Yeah, I think I've had lots of I've been lucky again. I think I've had really good experiences with my supervisors at PhD, again in my postdoc, and again with the colleagues that I have at Babraham. I think it's really important actually. That's always been one of my top priorities when I've been choosing a new job, is to be really mindful of the colleagues that I'm going to have there. I've always wanted to work with people that I liked, basically, but that I respected, sort of academically, but also on a personal level, because that ends up affecting so much of the dynamic of being at work. So yeah, I've had lots of nice mentors and lots of nice colleagues that I've learned from along the way.
Amazing. So if you could kind of maybe go back in time, and maybe if you were standing in front of yourself as an early career seeker, what kind of key advice would you give?
I think, well, what I just said would be one of them, that be careful and selective about who you choose to work with. I think another thing for me about working in research science is I think you have to learn to be comfortable with not knowing the answer to things and having experiments not work. That's it can feel like a failure, but that's actually a really important part of science. And I think that especially for younger, earlier career stage people, that's tough, right? Because when you've been studying and you've been working hard, usually the amount of effort that you put into your studies is kind of proportional to the grade that you get, right? So if you work hard, you end up doing well. And in the lab, that's not always true, right? You can work really hard, you can design a beautiful experiment, you can do it really well, and you get negative data and you get, essentially nothing for it other than you know what to change. But I think particularly for people who've done well at school and they've done well at university, that's quite an uncomfortable thing to get used to. So I think I would tell myself to just, that's part of it, it's part of the process. And, don't feel like you're failing or whatever when experiments don't work, because you have to have those failed ones to get to the right answer.
Brilliant. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing such amazing advice and giving us an insight into your career journey and a little bit about what you do. It's been, great to have you on here today. And I hope that those watching it as well enjoyed it and found it just as useful. If you've got any questions, I would definitely recommend getting in touch with Jo, particularly about the sustainability things.
Thanks, Jazz. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks so much.